Hi, everyone. Welcome back to today's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that I know really, really well. And what that topic is me. A lot of you in the group, in the Facebook group, Lady Landlords, have been asking for a little bit more information about how I got here and how I got involved in real estate investing. And I thought that's what we could talk about today. Now, if you've listened to other episodes of the podcast, I've always made it very clear that real estate investing was something I never thought that I would be a part of. This is not something that I thought I was going to do. Honestly, I never even planned on owning my own personal home, let alone actually owning investment properties. Something that absolutely never crossed my mind, which is kind of crazy because the way that I started was actually in a multifamily property. When my family came to the United States from South America, we actually ended up building a property in Westchester County, New York. Now, not me, but this was now my great grandfather and that side of my family. They built a multifamily property, and I thought was the coolest thing ever. So the way that the household actually worked was that there were 3 floors in this multifamily. On the middle floor of the house was actually where the main family lived. So we called that always my grandmother's floor. Then the basement floor was rented out to really anybody that was looking for an apartment. So we had tenants downstairs in the basement, even when I was a child growing up. And then the top floor of the house was actually given as a gift to the newlyweds of the family. So it was a place where they were able to move, live there for a year, rent free, to be able to get their feet on the ground before then they moved out to start a family. Well, the only problem that my grandmother was not expecting was that when my father got married and moved my mother into the house, well, my dad and mom never actually moved out. Instead, they ended up having me and my 2 brothers and raised us all in the house. It was something that I thought was really unique, getting to live with my grandmother so closely. Being a middle child and having 2 brothers, I always thought that my grandmother really got to be kind of a third parent for me. So I love the fact that she was able to share with me just some of these little hustler moves that even my grandmother was making way back in the day. But still, this concept was something that I never expected to be a part of at any time in my future. I then moved down to Washington, D.C., where I went to undergrad. And when I moved there, same thing. I planned on going to college. I was going to live in a dorm or rent an apartment. And that just kind of made sense to me. Well, my sophomore year of undergrad, I ended up moving off of campus. And I did live actually in a basement apartment in somebody else's house for a little while. And then after that, I moved into another apartment with a couple of other people to rent an apartment. So then I was now in the situation where it turned into my first experience of house hacking. The reason for that is after my first year of living in the house, my 2 roommates decided to move out, but I loved the house. I really enjoyed living there and I wanted to stay. So I got permission from my landlord to sublet the house. And then I was able to actually rent those rooms out. And I hope none of them are listening to this now, but I was able to make sure that they covered not only the rent for my room too, but also a little bit more. So that was actually my spending and drinking money throughout college. Was that way I was able to take that from having that roommate situation. And it also taught me a lot about landlording, because I'll be honest, my landlord down there in Virginia was not exactly the best landlord. So it really taught me a lot of things that maybe I could have done differently when I think back on it, knowing where I've come today. But this still was not something I ever expected. I actually moved from Virginia. I moved back to New York, and I lived in the city for many years, renting apartments at incredibly high rates of rent. I think I had my last time I lived in the city, I was renting a studio apartment for about $2,000 a month. And I guarantee you it was probably tinier than most of your closets. And it really kind of showed me just what the power of real estate could be. But I just never expected to be a person that would be able to own those properties. I always just expected everybody that owned those buildings or owned any type of rentals to clearly just be people that probably had like trust funds that never had to work a day in their life. And they didn't really have to think about how to spend these millions of dollars to be able to buy these apartment complexes. It just seemed absolutely impossible to me. And that's okay. It wasn't something I planned on doing. I actually had left my career in cancer research, moved over to Europe, and I started a tour company in Spain, which I ran for many years. And then I moved over into Portugal, where then I bought a bar. And then I had a bus that was able to take people from Spain to Portugal and back the other way. This worked out great, except for some really bad business decisions I made. And unfortunately, back in 2013, I moved home to the States pretty much penniless. I had to move back into my parents' house at like the age of 30, and that's usually not something that people really aspire to do. So I clearly needed to come up with another plan. I moved back into the city. I went back into cancer research. And honestly, it was really not the place for me at all. I only lasted a couple months back in that corporate 9 to 5 type environment before saying, no, there's got to be another way. I have to figure this out and I've got to get out of here. I did quit my job again, but I did not know really what to do at that point in time. I ended up starting a medical consulting company. And honestly, I was not making any money. I was living from every penny I made, went back into that business. And that was really where I was stuck. And that's what I did for years. It was not a great way to live. And I was really trying to hide the fact that I was completely in debt, had my credit completely dive after coming back from Europe. And I was really not in a very good place. Oddly enough, that was exactly when I met my now husband, Emilio. When I met Emilio, he had been in the States for a couple of years. He had immigrated from the Dominican Republic, and he really was working hard wherever he could to be able to create a better life for himself. He was always very much the saver. He was always very financially savvy. And it was also him that had this very big American dream of home ownership and the white picket fence and the 2.5 kids. And those were not any of those things that I thought were going to be in my future. But years of us dating and then deciding to kind of live together really kind of changed that perspective for me. We ended up moving to the South Bronx, where actually Emilio was living. I moved into his apartment. And one of the reasons we did that was also because I didn't have the money to keep living in that incredibly expensive studio apartment in Manhattan. So it made just financial sense for us to live there. Our plan was to live there for a year, save up some money, and then be able to buy a house to live in. And after the first year, one, I still hadn't made any good financial decisions in my life. So I wasn't able to purchase a home at that time. Two, I still really did not like the idea of now having a mortgage that I would have to pay. It was already difficult enough living paycheck to paycheck, but having a mortgage on top of that really just kind of scared me. And I said, you know what? This isn't the best decision for us. So we stayed living in the South Bronx for 3, maybe almost 4 years. And when a couple things that changed during that time living there. One of the things that actually changed during that time was that Emilio had actually said to me, hey, I'm ready to kind of start making moves in our relationship. I want to get married. I want to settle down. But unfortunately, there's just some things in your life that I think you need to kind of improve upon. And what he was really talking about was the fact that I was really in debt. That was going to be a big thing for him to have to carry on as a partner, especially when he had worked so hard to be able to put himself in a good financial situation. So I said, you know what? That's something that I can do, and that's something I can change. And I actually was very fortunate to be able to find a consulting gig that was supposed to be short term, but would be able to provide me with some extra income coming in. And I knew that it was going to be enough to be able to not only cancel my debt, but also be able to give me a little bit of a nest egg to be able to start saving for that down payment. So I took that position, and honestly, I took it really just to shove it in my husband's face. I just wanted to prove to him that it was something that I was able to do. But oddly enough, I ended up really enjoying the consulting gig. And it went so well that they actually offered me a full-time position back in cancer research. Now, after years of finding the wrong position after the wrong position, this one actually felt right. And it was a good spot for me. So I was able to go back to that W-2 position. And it was something that for the time being, really kind of fit with what our goals were of buying that house. So after a couple months, we decided to start looking at properties, and we were incredibly confused. There were so many different options, and also living where we were in New York City, we were just struggling with even figuring out where we would actually even live. I remember trying to ask and discuss with them, should we move back to Westchester? Should we end up in New Jersey? Should we go to Connecticut? Like, where exactly are these different places that we can live that are still accessible to the city, that are actually affordable? Manhattan is incredibly expensive, and we didn't think that was really a place that we would be able to afford. At that time, as we were looking into some different options, I started calling around different realtors, and I completely struggled. Realtors in the Bronx, in the city, were just so fast paced for me. It was really difficult for me to be able to ask some questions and get the help that I felt that I needed with making a decision on where we should be living. So I kept looking around. I kept asking them. I was able to get us pre-approved, But one of the decisions that I had actually made was I said to my husband that I did not want to be in a position where we would be living paycheck to paycheck and mortgage payment to mortgage payment. I said that I really thought that we needed to find a way to be able to either decrease our living costs or to actually get paid to live in a property. So at the time, I knew nothing about real estate investing. So I will always say that I came up with the most fantastic idea ever, which was so unique. I'm sure you've never heard of this concept before, which is to buy a multifamily property and live in one side and rent out the other. I had no idea that the term house hacking meant to do exactly this. I had no idea that there were all these people out there that were already doing this. I thought I was so unique, so original, and so creative at the time, only to learn later on that that was absolutely not the case. But either way, that's what we decided to do. We decided to buy that multifamily property, and we actually chose to stay in the Bronx at the time being. The problem was that the Bronx did not necessarily want us there. The Bronx was really growing at that point in time, and prices, just kind of like they are today, were going completely over ask, overnight, all cash. It was just so difficult. We kept getting outbid everywhere, and we got really, really discouraged. Luckily, the amazing realtor that we found, which specializes not only with working with investors, but also first-time home buyers. So that combination right there was fantastic. If you have not heard the story of my realtor, please go back and listen to the other episode in the Lady Landlords podcast with Michael Torello. I'll put his contact information down if you're in the area of New York or Connecticut. But Michael did such a great job by really identifying another area that would fit with what we were looking for and what would be a good place for us to live. He had actually found and identified a property for us in Yonkers, New York. Now, to me, that sounded insane. For those that don't know this area, Yonkers, New York means you actually have to take Metro North, which is like a commuter train and not a subway. To me, that was just way too far away. I thought this was going to be insane. I was like, there's no way I'm going to end up being one of those commuter people. Why can't I just be in a subway? But I said, fine. And I realized that relationships meant compromise. And if my husband wanted a house, we would figure out how to get him a house. So I actually was not even available to go look at the property in Yonkers. My husband went to go look with my realtor, and they walked around the property and decided that this was a good option. So we put a bid on it. We actually were able to win the accepted offer on our property against the other bidders that we had, and we now had our house. But I still hadn't seen it. What was great was that I knew that the numbers worked. I was already able to evaluate what we'd be able to save and what we could make on this property. And that to me was more powerful than actually seeing the property. To me, it really was supposed to be an investment property that, yes, I would be living in, but I wanted to make sure that financially that the numbers would work. And that was more important to me. So I was lucky enough to be able to go and see that property later in the day after we had already had the accepted offer. And I will say, when I walked in, I was very happy with it. It was going to be a good fit, and it worked out to be able to buy our first property. Now, when we were able to buy that first property at our closing, where now I'm getting a check already given to me that's telling me that I have those tenants living in this property, and now they're already paying me rent on day one, I was absolutely hooked. That for me was when I really saw the power of real estate investing and how this wealth could really be accumulated using this strategy. I remember saying to not only my realtor, but actually my mortgage broker, the day of the closing, that's it, I'm going to go buy another property. And they both pretty much thought I was nuts. They both were like, no, you just are closing on this property. There's no way you're going to buy another property. And I said, oh, yes, I am. And I'm going to figure out a way to do it. And that's exactly what I did. It was after we had closed on the first property that I started researching and learning about real estate investing. That's when I started diving into podcasts like the Lady Landlords podcast, when I then started looking into other options and these other resources that are out here. So I appreciate that you were taking the time to listen to my podcast. But it was at that time that I said, okay, we now need to get educated, and now we need to get serious about this. And what was great about that is that moving forward, I kept in touch with that same team that I built, that same broker, that same realtor, and all the same people that I was able to work with that did a great job for me on the first property. And that's how I was able to get the second property worked out. I actually then went and was able to purchase a multifamily that was off market now a 4-family that also came with the parking lot. And that really made a difference. Now, this property had a lot more work that had to go into it, and a lot more renovations and a lot of upgrades that still 2 years later, I am still working on doing. But once we were able to figure out how to get that second property, what I think is so cool about that property is my husband and I actually closed on the fourplex exactly 1 year to the date of the day that we bought the duplex. It was just so cool that even though certain people said I couldn't do it, that there is a way that you can figure out how to make things work. And that's exactly what we did. Since then, we were able to buy properties also in upstate New York and in the Dominican Republic. And now we've been able to grow our portfolio to having 10 doors, which I built that portfolio in about 2 years, which really got us to financial freedom. That was something that I was also never really kind of expecting. I knew I wanted to go move abroad again. I know I wanted to go and live in other countries and be able to travel and not work in cancer research anymore. But I never realized how easy it would actually be able to do to create a portfolio that would support that. In 2020, when COVID was really at the height of the pandemic and New York was really shut down, my husband had lost his job. He was out of work for about 1.5 years since he works in the restaurant industry. During that time, it was so relieving to actually say to him, hey, you know what? We're going to be okay. And the reason for that was because we had that rental income coming in. We could absolutely support ourselves with both my husband and I losing our jobs and still being able to keep up the lifestyle that we have now. Also, if you've been a part of Lady Landlords for a little while now, you will probably remember that I actually was very fortunate enough to go and live in the Dominican Republic for the winter. If anybody has ever been through a New York winter, you would know it is not the most pleasant thing. And honestly, it is a life goal of mine to never, ever see snow again. So I was so happy to get to go live in DR last winter. And honestly, I plan on doing the same thing this coming winter and all of the winters moving forward. I am perfectly happy to never see a snowflake again. But I share this because I want you to know that if you're listening to this, you have the same opportunity to do these same things. I feel like sometimes we get so stuck in that analysis paralysis term that you always hear people talking about, or you hear somehow these different stories of just all of a sudden this success story, but nobody ever talks about how they kind of got there. So I wanted to break that down for you and really kind of share and just say, hey, listen, I didn't know anything at the beginning. I also completely fell into this, not expecting that this was the place that I was going to be. But look what can be built in a certain period of time. It does not take forever. It does not take $1 million in the bank. And anyone, no matter where they're starting from an education standpoint, can absolutely do this and be in that same position where they get to have a little bit of peace of mind, knowing that they have money in the bank. God forbid anything happens to what's going on in their lives today. So if you are still on the fence about wanting to do this and getting involved in real estate investing, I hope this helped answer some of your questions today. Otherwise, if you are ready to go and you want to make sure that you are growing your portfolio but are not sure how, feel free to reach out to me. Shoot me a message either on Lady Landlords in the Facebook group, or feel free to send me an email. I'll put my email down in the show notes as well. And let me know how I can help you. We now have the Lady Landlords Mentorship Program, which has a bunch of different options and different price points to help you exactly where you are, be able to start moving forward and taking action. So don't wait another day. That was probably my biggest mistake in real estate investing. I wish I had done this years ago and it started then. I could not imagine what my portfolio is going to look like years from today. And I wish that I had just started sooner. So if you're ready to take action, I am here to help you along the way. Stay tuned for next week's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. And I hope that you got to learn a little bit more about me in today's episode. Thanks and see you all soon.